Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So that's the lowdown on the coup d'etat. The guy who writes the most recent book, The Neocon, is, of course, Edward Luttwak, in the tradition of Curzio Malaparte. It might be time to bring that research up to date. So, as we said, the manic forces of the Joseph Nye Soft Power International Crisis Group, Samantha Power, right? Samantha Power has to take credit, sitting in the White House in the National Security Council, one of the architects, for sure, of the overthrow of Mubarak in Egypt. These other countries now have been warned. Let's see if they have any ability to defend themselves. We're told that King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, this comes from Israeli sources, was on the telephone with Obama. This was apparently the most acrimonious conversation Obama ever had with a foreign leader, because King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia was beside himself with rage against the dilettante Obama for overthrowing Mubarak. And the story was then that the Saudi king had a mild heart attack, and that this became known. You can see it on the various Israeli websites that this also had some effect on the stock market. Another country under attack, of course, Italy, and the attempt of the Italian magistrates to overthrow Berlusconi. This is an interesting case where you have the coup run not through the army and not even through the public square that much, but through a group of judges, the so-called Milan magistrates, and a guy called Bruti Liberati. I guess this could be translated as freed brutes, I guess, in English. So this magistrate is persecuting Berlusconi with the obvious idea of overthrowing him. And again, no moralistic stuff. This is not the time for Ken Starr. This is pure power politics. This is an ally of Putin in Western Europe. The Berlusconi-Putin axis is very strong, and it's also an attempt to sabotage the South Stream pipeline, which would be an alternative to the essentially NATO-controlled puppet states in Eastern Europe that would be used to periodically sabotage and interrupt the flow of gas, and then blame that on the Russians. So all of these countries are now under likely attack. The Chinese have responded by rounding up various pro-Egypt bloggers and by using their defense wall to filter out the deification of Gonim and related things concerning Egypt. Remember, Assange is on record as saying that the true enemy of WikiLeaks is China because of their, on the whole, rather effective their use of a defensive wall against the broadcasts and material coming in from the West, right, that are used then with the Facebook and Twitter to organize this kind of stuff. So the manic mood at the CIA must now be overwhelming. The other thing to look at is Sudan, right? Immediately to the south of Egypt, you can see what the ultimate fate of a lot of these countries is going to be. Sudan is now apparently divided into two parts. We don't have the official outcome of this election yet, but semi-official has been announced, and it's a lopsided vote, 98% to nothing, in effect, against staying with the Khartoum government, and the idea is now to create a so-called independent government, which will be, of course, an abject creature of the U.S., the British, and the Israelis from the very first minute that it ever exists. And anybody who expects this to be a new independent state in Africa needs to have their head examined. It's just showing that the Bernard Lewis plan is operative, the idea of breaking Iraq into three, Iran into 4 or 5 or 6, Sudan into 2, Lebanon into other pieces, to carve Syria, to carve Turkey, and so forth. All of that operative. So what we now seem to have is a general worldwide assault by the Anglo-Americans against all existing nation-states, somehow triggered, or the signal for this was WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, again, exposed as a thoroughgoing operation of the U.S. and British intelligence communities because, of course, the as people are pointing out, the beginning of the fall of Mubarak were those alleged dispatches from Tunisia about the Sybaritic luxury and expenditures of the Ben Ali family, and then this is then applied also to Mubarak. You've also got these reports on Al Jazeera that Mubarak was worth $70 billion. Well, who knows, right? The previous estimates were far less. We remember Imelda Marcos with her shoes, right? When somebody is overthrown by the U.S., they always find some way to show that this person was an evil plutocrat. And I always wondered, how many pairs of shoes did Catherine Meyer Graham of the Washington Post have in her closet, and what was she calling Imelda Marcos about? Now let's switch gears, turning away from Egypt, which has inevitably occupied our attention for the last couple of weeks. Let's look at the domestic front now. And what we see here is that under the cover, or while public opinion is perhaps largely distracted by these dramatic events in Egypt, the CIA destabilization going on over there, you have the growth of this austerity psychosis in Washington, D.C. The austerity psychosis, which is now a frenetic search for things in the federal budget to cut. I would give you a historical parallel. Back in the Weimar Republic and in the period of the deflationary depression, 1930, 31, 32, you have this government that we've talked about in the past, Heinrich Brüning, a government that was brought in. The way was open for Brüning to create this government by Hjalmar Schacht, the head of the German central bank, the Reichsbank in that period. Hjalmar Schacht, an agent of Morgan and the British, Lord Montague Norman of the Bank of England. And what Schacht did was to make sure that the existing SPD government, SPD-led government, the Grand Coalition, the Hermann Müller, was overthrown in the spring of 1930, and then brought in Brüning. And Brüning carried out the kind of policy that we're being told is necessary today. Cut and gut, brutal cuts. And, of course, tax increases, because you will have those too, inevitably. Maybe you won't have them going at the federal level, but you're going to have them through the states. So it's the same idea. The Brüning experience compels our attention right now because it shows that all of this cut and gut is condemned to failure. And we will be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.